Tight right now between State Street and King Drive. There's a collision in the center lane. Your travel time is 29 minutes, 3:55 to Lakeshore Drive, up on 28. Ryan is 15 minutes, 95th to downtown. Bishop Ford, 16 minutes, 80-94 to the merge. A crash near 111th Street, clear. There's still congestion starting at 115. That's traffic. I'm Jim Talamonte on AM 560, The Answer.
Chicago's Morning Answer continues next in our AM 560 Weather Center. Patchy morning, freezing fog, otherwise clouds, and 36 today. 33 at O'Hare. Next news at 7. Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
From the Matrix Home Solutions studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560, The Answer.
Listen to AM 560, The Answer, online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, on your Alexa-powered smart speaker, on TuneIn, iHeart, and radio.com. If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. And yesterday, amid the violence on the Hill and criticized for issuing a statement too late, President Trump offered this video message to supporters that had shown up for the Save America rally.
I know your pain. I know you're hurt. We had an election that was stolen from us. It was a landslide election, and everyone knows it, especially the other side. But you have to go home now. We have to have peace. We have to have law and order. We have to respect our great people in law and order. We don't want anybody hurt. It's a very tough period of time. There's never been a time like this where such a thing happened, where they could take it away from all of us, from me, from you, from our country. This was a fraudulent election, but we can't play into the hands of these people. We have to have peace. So go home. We love you. You're very special. You've seen what happens. You see the way others are treated that are so bad and so evil. I know how you feel. But go home and go home in peace.
Trey Gowdy, former rep from South Carolina, of course, described Trump's comments as tepid at best, saying this.
Just what a terrible day it is for America. I never thought I would see Americans scaling the wall to attack the people's house, the Capitol. So if you're thinking about moving to a narco state or a banana republic and you wonder what it's like, today was a good idea of what it would be like. That is not America. That is not this idea of America. We're a nation of laws. We're not a nation of people who attack law enforcement officers, trying to accomplish a goal that was never going to be accomplished in the first place, Martha. This was always a fool's errand. So why people are surprised that Mike Pence did exactly what the Constitution calls him to do, I'm surprised that they're surprised.
And you know, Lindsey Graham last night, I thought he did a great job because Trump, and by the way, that video was taken down because Twitter's account was shut down for 12 hours until he deletes that and a few other things. And it was yanked off of YouTube and off of Facebook. But Lindsey Graham, like, there's no voter fraud. And just listen, please, just listen to this.
They said there's 66,000 people in Georgia under 18 voted. How many people believe that? I asked, give me 10, and I had one. They said 8,000 felons in prison in Arizona voted. Give me 10, I hadn't gotten one. Does that say there's problems in every election? I don't buy this. Enough's enough. We got to end it. Vice President Pence, what they're asking you to do, you won't do because you can't. You talk about interesting times. I associate myself with Rand Paul. How many times will you hear that?
Although it seems to me that what you have with some of the Lindsey Graham types of the world is a bit of piling on when it's safe to pile on. For more on all of this, we're pleased to be joined again by David Drucker, political reporter for the Washington Examiner. David, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Yeah, good to be here. Thank you.
You know, in advance of Trump's remarks at the rally, in advance of that video that we played amid the violence, there was a speech that Don Jr. gave at the rally where he said essentially the message to McConnell and the establishmentarians in the Republican Party that the Republican Party isn't your Republican Party anymore. It's Trump's Republican Party. And for those of you who don't support the objections that were being telegraphed at that point when Trump Jr. was speaking yesterday morning, I'll be in your backyard in a couple of months, essentially supporting your opponents, just like Trump said the other day that he would be back in Georgia in a couple of months to support who's ever running against Brian Kemp. I guess that my question is your sense today whether going forward past January 20th into the 2022 election cycle, which begins in earnest, is this still going to be Trump's Republican Party after yesterday? Does he still have the kind of sway? Will Kevin McCarthy want to enlist him to help with House races?
Well, I think that's a good question, and we're going to have to wait and see, to be quite honest with you. But I think in the immediate, I think a lot of Republicans in Washington still believe that it's Trump's Republican Party, and they're still worried about primary challenges. And I think we saw that yesterday, because even though in the Senate there were only minimal votes to sustain the objections, in the House there were a majority of House Republicans. I think about 120, 125 of them, somewhere in there, including the numbers 1 and 2 ranking House Republicans, Kevin McCarthy and Steve Scalise, who voted to object when they could to several states, and those objections would overturn the election if sustained in actuality and throw the election to Trump in theory. And so I think they're still very concerned because they have seen the same non-evidence that Lindsey Graham has seen. I know there's a lot of belief. I've talked to voters, I've talked to Republican officials, and I know how people feel about the election. But even in court, the president's lawyers couldn't present any or didn't present any. And so Republicans in the House haven't seen anything different than Republicans in the Senate. But I think that they're up every 2 years. They're closer to the ground, and I think they're still concerned that Trump and his eldest son will show up in their districts and campaign against them, and that even if they don't, grassroots Republicans in their district will punish them nonetheless. And so I don't think we can conclude this morning, despite everything, that it's not Trump's Republican Party. I think what we can say is that for those Republicans that appreciated the president's policies, were concerned about opposing him because they understood where their voters were in relation to the outgoing president, that for many of them, this was a final straw of sorts. Not only is he on his way out, but he is now asking them, in their opinion, was asking them to do things that they simply could not countenance. I mean, you look at Vice President Mike Pence as somebody, and I've interviewed Pence about this. I've talked to people close to Pence. Pence doesn't get enough credit for being a savvy politician. He understood when he signed up with Trump what he was signing up for. But he made a decision for several reasons that he was in. And if he was in, there were things that went along with that, both for policy reasons and political reasons. But when the president asked him to do something unconstitutional and basically unilaterally, as one man, change the outcome of an election where hundreds of, a couple 100 million people voted practically, nearly, he, not only could he not stomach it, it wasn't constitutional. There's a last straw for everybody, and I think for many, that last straw was yesterday.
And David, CNN and CBS and NBC are reporting that this morning cabinet members have begun discussions about invoking the 25th Amendment to remove President Trump from office. Do you see that happening? And they're doing it because of yesterday's events, obviously.
Correct. I think that it's a bit of a complicated procedure, and I don't know with less than 2 weeks to go that you actually have enough time to invoke the 25th Amendment and proceed with it. But I do think that the idea that some members of the cabinet, some members of the staff are thinking about it, talking about it, and wondering if it's something they should pursue, I think that part is real. maybe the president's, statement from this morning that he's now going to, not get in the way of an orderly transition of power will, quell some concerns. But the concerns that led to those, we've for 4 years, right, we've dealt with stories like this that often I think are just sort of rumors run amok. People sort of talk about something and it becomes a thing. I think these discussions, though informal or real, I just find it logistically unlikely that they could get there in 13 days.
Well, there's something else I find it, which is sort of swamp-like in its expediency. And it's the same thing with the objections yesterday. Whether you believe the objections were proper or not, the idea that those people who said I was, like Kelly Loeffler, for example, or Langford from Oklahoma, I'm going to object because I think the Cruz third door audit commission is a good idea. Well, now because of what happened on the Hill, we're going to show that the mob doesn't win, and we're going to get back to regular business and concluding our business. But now I'm going to change my mind. Well, what changed? If it was a good idea before the mob entered the Capitol, then it's still a good idea after. It's completely about optics, and it's the same thing with this 25th Amendment nonsense. Whether you could do it or you couldn't do it, what do you think that would engender? Do you think that would engender a flag-waving ticker tape parade for you, members of the Trump cabinet or senators or whoever is among the whispering crowd? Of course it wouldn't, and it would further enrage the Trump base. So this is all sort of pathetic, transparent press release politics as far as I'm concerned. And while I don't appreciate how Trump handled things yesterday, particularly with respect to Pence, the idea that all of these institutionalists with their moral hand-wringing giving us kindergarten lectures about how violence is bad are doing something heroic, I also won't stomach.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think that there's a lot of political expediency going on. I actually think you're right. Look, if you actually believe that the presidential election was fraudulent, then it shouldn't really matter what happens from the perspective of protests and civil unrest. If you feel like it's so egregious that you need to try and insert Congress into the role of overturning results or changing results. And I think that what that reveals, number one, is what we like to call in Washington, vote no, hope yes.
Yeah,
I don't think
exactly.
Josh Hawley, or by the way, this is like a disease in Washington because a lot of the no votes, there's some, look, I don't want to be too judgy here, right? But there's some real principled politicians on both sides. Their no votes are serious. They really hope the thing sinks. But then there are a lot of no votes on both sides, both parties, that are often, they don't really want the bill to fail. But they know that their no vote won't cause it to fail, and now they can register their principled objection without having to deal with the consequences. It really wasn't clear that Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz, although they're very intelligent, principled politicians on many issues, really wanted to delay or change the results of the presidential election. But nonetheless, they went through the motions here on commissions and investigations, despite all of the investigations and court cases that didn't amount to anything. And then on the other hand, I will say this, I think that there were some Republicans that were legitimately appalled because they never really thought Trump was a lot of bluster. And I don't think they really thought at the end of the day that his rhetoric and protests of the election would culminate in actions the way they did yesterday.
But don't you think it was irresponsible, though, of him to string along his followers and say, January 6th is going to be this epic big day and Biden, the election is going to be tossed out because of Mike Pence?
Yeah, I think it was irresponsible, and I think it was politically misguided. Look, I think the president, if you strip away all of the behavior that bothered people and all of the things he said that bothered people, there are some legitimate accomplishments he can claim. He could be talking about on his way out the door the Abraham Accords or Operation Warp Speed, where the vaccine for the coronavirus was developed in record time. There was a historic tax overhaul. Look, I could go on and on. But, the presidency is about more than legislative and foreign policy accomplishments. It's about your stewardship of the country and how you conduct yourself. The presidency is both about, logistical, legislative leadership and moral leadership, and it's about caring for the institutions because you're just renting them out. And I think that what the president did gave his most ardent supporters, and even some not so ardent, this idea that something could be done on January 6th that could not be done. And he actually called Mike Pence a coward for following the Constitution. And it also went, I've just said this often about Trump. He likes to put on a big show at his rallies, and people, we've seen the response. It's been very much like a movement. But you always have to worry and be mindful that some people might really take you seriously with some of the things you say that to you are colorful hyperbole, that to you are part of the show. As a reporter, I don't like to preen, but when you call, for instance, the media the enemy of the people, I don't really care. Big deal. But if somebody actually believes that I'm the enemy of the people, there are things that are done to enemies of the people. So when you say that about Democrats, or you say it about Republicans, or you say it about reporters, somebody in the crowd might take you seriously. And I think what we saw yesterday was a whole bunch of people feeling and believing the president that the election was stolen, that a crime was committed, decided to do what people often do when that happens, and when you're encouraged by somebody of high stature and respect, or at least in a high position, you go and try and do something about it, or at least register your frustration in ways that we don't normally do in this country. And I think that's what happened yesterday. And I think it's unfortunate for the president that he didn't approach his post-election period a lot differently, because I think that his presidency is going to be remembered for this more than anything else, because